Hello and welcome everyone back to another episode here on the Adam Hazara Show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Hope you guys are enjoying your spring break here on this Monday. It is April 14th, 2025. We're just going live here at exactly 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, more good stuff to talk about today. Of course, Braddock baseball and softball. We're going to be reviewing their last week before spring break last week. A couple games where they played South County and Fairfax. And, of course, we're going to get into some of the games that are being played on both sides. Of course, this week will be going on. Of course, softball has their first game tomorrow, one of two in South Carolina, with a couple of teams from New York that they're going at it with. Of course, Braddock and baseball. A couple of matchups already versus Edison. We'll get into those matchups, and they're going to be playing Winston Churchill up in Maryland tomorrow for an out-of-state matchup. And then we're also going to be getting into the Hayfield game that is also coming up as well for them this week. So before we begin, make sure you guys, of course, as always, leave a like button, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss another episode of the show, and share this video with a friend. All those, of course, greatly appreciated as always. So without further ado, let's get started today here on the show. So we're going to start off, as always, with some things on the Lake Braddock baseball side. So we're going to first get into what was last week. And so, of course, that first game that they played last week versus Fairfax, of course, again, a much-needed week where the Bruins needed some wins after losing three in a row the previous week. Had not lost 3 in a row in, I believe, 10-plus years. And for Lake Braddock, it seems like that was maybe a 10-plus game losing streak, considering they don't go on losing streaks as long as 3 games or more than that. Of course, rebound big time with big wins over Fairfax. And then later on, South County. So they got into some good momentum going into the break. We're going to break down a couple of those games. So, of course, Fairfax, man, a much, much needed win. Now, we keep talking about how there's been some offensive struggles with the Bruins early on this season. And that's specifically in a couple of positions. Of course, in the corner outfield spot, you have Ryan Harding, who's been off to a slow start. Matthew Holcomb in right field has not been very productive. The DH spot has somewhat to be desired, with Bo Padgett struggling there. And CJ Prentice, who you've been placing at catcher and DH, and with where he has a lot of strikeout concerns surrounding him at the plate, hoping that he can hit well and produce some big RBI production. And the Bruins have been iffy on, starting him this season a little bit. And again, that game, offense didn't really show, only scoring 3 runs against a Fairfax team that is not really the best, and it's a pitching duel. Of course, some big game, but the offense did its job, and the main thing I want to get onto is just that, Jack Cavalario finally made his first start against Fairfax, and man, I told you, he was a move where you could really shake up a rotation, and man, Bruins, I think, finally had to start Jack Cavalario after Leo DeLomo struggles. He pitched the last game on that Saturday versus McLean. Last Saturday, that was before spring break. You couldn't pitch Bo because he had pitched 6 innings versus West Homewick that previous Friday. Or 7, I should say. Excuse me. And so you got to go in that game with, kind of thinking, well, we can't use our 2 main guys, so we're going to have to finally use Jack Cavalario. And man, did he show up. 6 innings, only 2 earned runs. Did a solid job. You couldn't have asked more from him. And, we've been talking about how he needs to really be that number 2 pitcher behind Padgett in that rotation if the Bruins want to get off on a more of a good winning streak and if they really want to start winning. And, there's not a lot of shakeups they can do right now. Because, again, it's who they have. This is high school baseball. You can't make signings. You can't make trades, like in the pros. So, they just, really they just kind of stick with what they've got. The only thing they can do is bring up some guys from JV, which they've done. They brought up Hudson Drum. They brought up Carson Flipowicz, who's, those two guys are seen as big parts of the Bruins' future. They're really high in them. Flipowicz started in right field that game. I think he got on once or twice. And we'll get into him in a few moments. But again, what really irks me is how long it took for Cavalario to finally start. It took pretty much the idea of having no choice to start him after you could have started him versus Alexandria City and West Springfield. Those were 2 games against 2 opponents who were really, really good. And they're kind of running away with it. They're already way ahead of Braddock in the Patriot District standings. And, that was where, you could have probably, changed it up. We need a sense of urgency by going with a hotter hand. There was no urgency in that. And, it's a battle. And, it's not a very good look if you're waiting until when you have no choice to start Cav. Because, again, Delomo couldn't pitch because he pitched a day, previous game. I don't know if he was eligible or not, but the Bruins didn't want to pitch him. And then Bo Padgett wasn't eligible. It took that much to finally start Cavalario. And it wasn't even against a good opponent. It wasn't even against an opponent as good as AC or WS. So, what I like to wonder is, the thought process behind that. Again, we keep talking about, there's not been enough of a sense of urgency. And I think in part, Coach Thompson and the Bruins staff have some blame that has to go to them. This can't keep happening. You're hoping after the break that Cavalario is going to be in a rotation with Bo Padgett. Those are your 2 guys. And Delomo, again, maybe he's not meant to be a starter. I'm not saying he can't be a big part of a team, but maybe he's just not meant to be a starter. You obviously, sometimes you have to find out things the hard way. And of course, that one shaky start maybe versus South County in opening night, maybe that was the hard way you found out that he was not going to be a good starter this year. But Cavalario should have been your guy those 2 games versus West Springfield and the Titans. Period. And now you see Cavalario making another start today. He started versus Edison. Bruins bounced back today to win 11-4 for a second spring break game. Weirdly enough, they faced Edison twice. This game, Edison, the last one out South County Middle School on Saturday. They're supposed to play at Lake Braddock, as well as Winston Churchill in a little doubleheader. But because of rain, they moved those games back to other days, and they're now at different locations now because of that rain. They lost to Edison 4-1 on that Saturday game. He came back and beat them today 11-4. Cavalario, never good outing. He continues to pitch well. 7 innings, 3 earned runs. Or 6 innings, 3 earned runs, I should say. And 3 strikeouts, 2 walks. Did allow some hits. 8 hits allowed in 6 innings. And then, they had Leo Delomo, who finally actually produced a decent outing for once. He pitched a perfect 7th inning to close out the game for Bruins to win 11-4. And so that brings up another topic in that, with Edison, these Edison games, pretty surprising. That in the first game, Bruins lost to a national district opponent. Very surprising. I believe it's first time since 2017 when they lost to Annandale when Annandale was still in the Patriot District. That was the last time the Bruins lost to a national district team at all, in any capacity. And, and again, they started Cody Blaylock on the mound, who's been kind of in the back end of the pitching staff this year. They're hoping that they get big innings out of him. Possibly. He's maybe a name that steps up. And they had, I believe, Hudson Drum, Jake Drum's younger brother, pitch as well. But again, the offense wasn't good enough. Didn't hit. And, probably should have hit against a pretty shady pitching staff again of National District not being very good. And, Edison, I still think they don't have the best pitching staff. So once again, Bruins probably should have hit that game. They didn't. And again, overall, you can see kind of the offensive inconsistencies isn't just with facing these good teams, but it's also facing, lower tier teams where it's come back to bite them, in not hitting and not coming up big. And I think they had a chance to score that game. They didn't capitalize. So again, for runners in scoring position, they didn't hit well. They didn't step up. And again, maybe there's a lot of pressure on this offense right now to step up. And maybe, and that's how it's been throughout the first half of this season. You're hoping they turn around. You're hoping, that, again, Ryan Harding, who struggled, especially in that outfield outside of Evan George, has not been very productive. You're hoping that Ryan Harding finally starts stepping up. I think he's been getting more hits. He's been working better at bats as of late. I think his numbers have gone up. You're hoping he starts slugging the ball a bit more, but at least he's, having his on-base percentage go up. So at least he's getting on base. You're hoping that is a sign of good things to come. At right field, still question. Matt Holcomb still not hitting well outside of a one game versus a bad Woodson team where he had 4 hits. You're maybe hoping that one of those other guys step up is Andrew Rubino. Maybe Dean Johnson, as he's seen a couple starts this year, who's been very good defensively. Can he hit offensively? That's the question for him. Or, again, Carson Flipowicz, a freshman brought up from JV, big part of that 2028 class with Evan Chambers and Hudson Drum. Is that someone who the Bruins go to? In my opinion, if starting Flipowicz is not a bad option at all. And, something that the Bruins should really consider if, they're not going to get production out of Holcomb or Rubino or whoever it is that's already on varsity that has been playing for him in that position in right field. You're not losing anything out of Flipowicz. Maybe throw him into the fire and see what he can do. Maybe that way it throws a spark under them. Maybe you see someone like Ryan Harding last year threw a spark after he came into left field, after they were struggling. Start the season having 4 or 5 different starters there around spring break. Maybe that's something you could do. Maybe you see Flipowicz start these next couple games. I'm just saying. But again, that's something the Bruins could consider. That's something in the cards to really have. And you hope to see. So, and then CJ Prentice also played today again. A couple RBIs for him. We'll kind of talk about today's game. Prentice, couple RBIs. Andrew Wiskoski started. He had an RBI. Again, the lineup, of course, I think is also being heavily hampered by the fact that Matt Mayer is injured. Went down, of course, with a torn meniscus on opening day. He has not come back, and he's not going to for the rest of the season. His high school career is over. Again, a big threat in the middle of the Bruins order that they would love to have right now, and I think the lineup would be a lot better. And do I think the Bruins are that bad of a team? I don't think they're too bad of a team. I think they're a lot better than they are on paper. Of course, the injuries, of course, not only Mayer, but Bradley DeHay and the pitching staff would be big for him. That's also been a big loss for them this season. I hear, he's probably not going to be coming back at all with his UCL problems. But, again, I think for Bruins, still on paper, when they're healthy, would be a very good team. And I think they could be just as good as Alexandria City or West Springfield if they were fully healthy. And so, of course, the Bruins, just a quick mention, they did get a big win, of course, after kind of went on a little 2-game winning streak. So it was 2 big wins last week. Of course, Bo Padgett pitched well in that game. 6 innings of 2-run ball. He continues to do well. And then multi-hit games from a few guys in that. And then you kind of move on. Let's kind of get into some of the games that are going on. Some remaining games this week. So tomorrow you face a pretty good Winston Churchill team, of course, led by former Lake Braddock coach Brock Hunter. He's in the second season over there. He's doing good things with the Bulldogs over there. They're even going up to Maryland for that game, so it'll be quite the travel on the bus. Probably be a pretty tough game. I know that they have a couple. They have some good pitchers. They've been someone who's been really competing well in a Maryland 4A ball the last few years. So the Bruins probably be a tough matchup for them. Maybe expect Bo Padgett to pitch maybe that game. And then they do play Hayfield at South County High School, I believe, on Wednesday. And, even though Hayfield's, no national district trash, with his Bruins team, you kind of never know. Edison can beat him, and Hayfield, Shirley, who's beaten South County this year in spring break, even though South County's not the best team, but still they could probably put up a good fight against them. You expect them to. If Hayfield could beat them, then they could probably beat Braddock as well. And, they've proven they can face some good, some Patriot District competition this year. So that's what you pretty much have on the baseball side of things. Again, hope the offense, a few guys in the offense, you hope the outfielders start coming around. You hope the DH spot gets sorted out. You hope the pitching starts to do better outside of Cavalario and Padgett. Of course, we've seen another quick note to pitching. We saw Andrew Wiskowski get a good save. Jamie Wiskowski's younger brother on Tuesday of last week versus the Lions. He actually got the save relief of Cavalario, who pitched those 6 innings of 2-run ball. Maybe they put Andrew Wiskowski. Maybe that's a big player if they have step up. And I think you could probably see more innings from him on a mound, come later this season in big moments to get those big outs. I think he definitely has that Wiskowski sort of persona where he's going to be very calm, very cool, not going to let the big moment get to him too much. And so he's going to really show up for you, just as Jamie had for the Bruins a lot. So you have that going on. So again, very tough matchup with Winston Churchill tomorrow. For Bulldogs, again, very tough matchup with a team that's been competing, kind of a state contender over the last few years. A team that's lost a lot the last few years, but they've really retooled really well. Still always a main threat in Maryland ball. Be a big threat for Bruins. We'll see. Hayfield game will be a bit interesting. Be interesting to see how that turns out, but you'd expect maybe Bo Padgett to pitch versus the Bulldogs tomorrow, and maybe Hayfield game. You may see some innings from Delomo. Maybe, put him in a non-pressure situation today when the Bruins are already up by 7 runs. You hope that maybe will get him on the right rhythm. And hoping that maybe he'll pitch well, which the Bruins will really need down a stretch with the lack of pitching depth. They'd really like Delomo to step up with someone who they've had high hopes for this year. So they're hoping that goes down. And hopefully the Bruins, in the second half, they can finally catch up to West Springfield. They can catch up to Alexandria City. They can, if they could win against both those teams, that would be big. They're still looking for that. Bruins are still looking for that big statement win this year as well. They haven't beaten a very good opponent. I think all their wins have mainly come against, teams that are not nearly as good as who's at the top of a region, who they know are 2 main rivals in the Titans and the Spartans. So you're hoping, so Bruins, they got a lot of work to do in the second half. They got a lot of work to do these last couple of games of the tournament here during spring break. So we're going to transition over to the softball side of things now. So, of course, Bruins, got the 2 more wins last week, two wins that were needed. Of course, they defeated Fairfax. We ended that 4-game stretch. We were kind of facing some easier teams that weren't really that good. They beat Fairfax 11-1. Mercy ruled them. They continue to roll. Beat everyone that they've needed to. And of course, you had the big game with South County on Thursday. Very, 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 kind of very intense game early. Of course, Mackenzie was, Verdejo didn't have as good of a start that day. Gave 6 earned and 3 home runs. So she didn't have her A game, but the Bruins offense, pretty good. 17 runs scored on 17 hits. Of course, Mackenzie herself will hit another 2-run home run off Julia Niner, getting her back for 1 Niner homer offered South County on March 18th opening night. And you like to see that from the Bruins. So it's good to see their offense doing well against South County. And they get some 2 wins. They still got good momentum going into the break. Of course, we'll kind of get into the couple of games that they're going to play coming up. So tomorrow they do play. The first team is the Rush Henrietta Rural Comments. they over there in New York, they've actually been kind of a state contender themselves. That'd be a very tough game for the Bruins. They've been kind of state contender themselves. The Bruins will be playing them. That's a very tough team. They believe they won a state title a couple years ago. They lost to Greenbrier Christian today, which I think is a team from a 7-5-7. So that's the first team they're facing. They do have a couple of pretty good players. We've Carton Hartel, who's D3 commit or D2 D3 one of two to Ithaca University. She's big on that team. They also have, I believe, Elizabeth. She's a D1 catcher. Elizabeth Gleghorn, who's committed to Lemoyne, Shelby. Wayne Games one. I also have a couple of other good players. So that'll be a good matchup for Bruins. My expectation, you probably see, since it's spring break, you're probably not going to see Verdejo pitch every inning. In fact, it's not going to happen. You're probably going to see her maybe pitch, the first few innings of the game. Then you're probably going to see some Allens get some time on the mound. You're going to see probably Caitlin Vaught get some time on the mound. You're going to see Olivia Federico get some time on the mound. Those are names that the Bruins would like to get out there and, would like to get some experience. So you probably see that. A big matchup for them tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, they face Southwestern High School. Couldn't really find much of them. The interesting fact is that, of course, that's Nick Sirianni's alma mater. Be interesting, Mackenzie, who's a big Eagles fan. Wonder how she feels about pitching against her favorite football team's alma mater. So, quick, interesting fact to point out there real quick. And so, I'm guessing that'll be another tough matchup because usually all these teams are really tough. But again, we'll see kind of what happens down in Myrtle Beach tomorrow. And so, overall, pretty, we'll kind of see what happens on both sides, but still very interesting stories. And so, of course, softball coming up a couple games for spring break. And then you have baseball coming up for a couple games. I'm out on the show today. Thank you guys, everyone, so much for watching. See you soon.